How are companies hiring today versus 3, 5, 6, 7 years ago?
It's actually not the best time we find ourselves in, to be honest. From the point that is COVID, which was a total anomaly, it's very hard to weigh up things during that time just because, it's unprecedented. What's our biggest export? Financial services, banking, that type of stuff. So you look at the big four, you look at the KPMGs of the world and what they're kind of like predicting, and they're saying that in 2026 we'll see a
Jacob, thank you for being on the show, man. Pleasure to have you here. Recruiter extraordinaire. We appreciate you, man. Thank you for being here.
pleasure to be here, man. Anytime, anytime.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to jump straight in, man.
Sure.
Because myself, many other Gen Z people, many other people in general, right, we need to know, as the Mr. Recruiter, man,
Sure.
do recruiters actually read CVs?
CVs are a very funny one. To be honest with you, in short, yes, but probably not in the way that you might imagine they do.
Okay.
So I'll elaborate a bit more. Basically, at some point, yes, we definitely do look at CVs, or for the most part, and I can explain why most part in a sec, but yes, in short. To be honest, most of the information contained within a CV should be quite brief, pretty succinct. So it's not like we're getting your life story in a CV, and that's not really what we're looking for. A good recruiter would talk to you, hopefully, or aim to if possible. And then throughout the conversation, they'd probably learn most of this information about you anyway. So where we do look at CVs for the most part is trying to confirm a lot of the information that you've already shared with us previously.
Okay.
Or, in today's day and age where platforms like LinkedIn, for example, are imperative to what we do, we actually already have a pretty good idea of what your history is with companies anyway. So what we do is basically try to align that with your LinkedIn and see the similarities between the CV and your profile just to make sure everything lines up. When it comes to dates, for example, sometimes a CV might reveal that, your LinkedIn profile is not totally up to date, which is the case for a lot of people. And then there's the completely, unique scenario these days where maybe someone's a bit older, they don't have a LinkedIn profile. So in those cases, we definitely do. Mostly, I'd say today we just kind of use it to verify information that we already know.
Okay. So when we're out here looking to apply for jobs, we're hitting the filters, LinkedIn Easy Apply.
Yep.
Is it more of a situation where you're getting your 100, 200 job applications and then you're looking at the profiles, and then once you've seen an interesting profile, then you're going to call and look at the CV, or is it something different?
Well, to be honest with you, as the recruiter, we're usually the ones seeking out the people. So when we do get people contacting us, they do come through with their CV, in which case we don't really have to look at their LinkedIn, because we already have the, I guess, most up-to-date form of information that they're willing to share with us. So in those cases, we just go off their CV. We don't really look at that LinkedIn profile. But, you know, uh, when we have so much to look at, so many different profiles that we're going after ourselves as the recruiter,
Okay.
we do want to have some form of CV from them at some point. But again, more so for verification reasons, but most importantly for candidate ownership, which is important to a recruiter.
What do you mean by candidate ownership? Sorry.
So candidate ownership, just to put it very plainly, is when we contact our clients, when we work with companies, candidate ownership is basically us having ownership of the candidate we put forward. So the best way of having that is through a CV, because basically there's no clearer way of someone saying, hey, I want you to represent me with company A, than them sending you, pretty much the most, I guess, official document that they have in that form, which is a CV.
Okay.
So them sending that over, and then if you want to prove it even further, just by like showing the messages, you can say, hey, this is me working with the candidate, so therefore I have candidate ownership over them, and I'm the recruiter putting them forward. That basically eliminates other companies trying to put that same person forward for the job, for example.
Okay. So, am I wrong in thinking, because hearing you talk about candidate ownership, this is making me think, is the reason why a lot of people maybe hear from a recruiter once and then never again because they fall out of that candidate ownership pool, and then the recruiter finds a bunch of other more interesting CVs? Is a bit of a Hunger Games going on?
Well, maybe sometimes, but I'd say that the good recruiter, or at least I try to in every single instance, is always, if they fall out of favor for whatever reason, let them know why. So I
Hmm.
know that we can get into this. I know there's some ethical problems and a lot of gray areas with recruiters for why maybe people don't view them in the highest regard. Um, but sometimes that's the case.
Yes.
It's a bit harsh to say that that's always the case, but yes, I mean, better candidates come and go.
Hmm.
That's not to say that they can't drop out for any other reason. So I'd hope again, the good recruiter keeps in touch with that person until the process is officially finalized for whatever reason that may be.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Well, on good recruiters, let's shift over to good candidates.
Sure.
What do you think makes a good CV? Like, if you had to give it like a top five, say top five things.
Top five things for a good CV. Well, to be honest with you, something that people still get wrong to this day, and it shocks me, is I kind of alluded to this earlier. The CV is only supposed to be a brief summary of what you're about. A lot of like the things that are included in some people's really detailed CVs
Yeah.
should be probably left for the later conversation, the next stage.
Like what, for example?
So, you don't have to explain on every single thing that you worked out. Or you don't have to say every single task that you've been set. Um, what's more so important is just give a very, brief summary, maybe 3 or 4 bullet points for each place that you've worked out of. Okay, this is what I've done. This is what I focused on. And basically, what I'm trying to get to say is keep it to 2 pages. Some
Hmm.
people go a bit overboard. 3, 4. No one wants to read a dissertation or an essay. It's just supposed to be a brief about what you've been up to, a little bit about you, your professional experience, your education, and then if you want to throw in some other additional interest, that's fine as well. But people, they sometimes tend to go overboard a bit.
A full-page CV is that actually common?
Listen, I've seen 8 pages before. Yeah, it can happen. It can happen, and I can assure anyone who's listening out there, no one wants to be reading through that. So
Do you think that's a situation in your experience where it's people who are maybe trying to break into an industry and are like desperately trying to get maybe their non-industry careers to fit into that job description that they're applying for? Or do you find it's more really experienced people who don't want to let go of any accomplishment?
you know what? I actually find that the most common reason for why that is actually sometimes to do with the role. So
Hmm.
some people, when they come from like a, how should I put this, more an analytical background, or maybe they specialize in what I consider to be more maybe operations level stuff, they tend to go into very fine details because that's kind of what their job requires them to do. When they're providing reports or supporting whoever it is with detailed information, that's how they behave at work. So sometimes they feel like maybe that's the appropriate thing to do in their CV, which I
Mm.
don't really suggest. So I find that to be a little bit common. And also, sometimes even from like a cultural perspective, obviously, I actually work with candidates all over the world, from the US, Asia, Middle East, and I tend to find that some of like the I guess the global aspect of it can really complicate things because what we deem to be common over here in the UK isn't always the case abroad. And so I'd imagine maybe someone who's living in the UK and
Yeah.
they might be having influence from a parent or something like that, kind of giving them tips on how to formulate a CV. They might walk away from speaking to them thinking, okay, I need to pack this stuff with as much information as possible.
Mm.
Whereas in reality, I don't think that's the best strategy.
Okay. Okay. No, that makes perfect sense. I mean, we've touched on it a little bit already with the eight
Mm.
pages then, but what do you think are the most common mistakes when it comes to writing a CV?
Another common mistake is, and again, I appreciate some people are coming straight out of university, so they don't have that much professional experience. But there's some like common mistakes, like, um, putting maybe your education as the number one thing,
Mm.
maybe completely leaving out like a brief about yourself.
Do you think that's a cultural thing, or do you find that with all different types of people?
So I find that the most with people that have just come out of university, and some people are lucky enough to have never had to work before. Maybe they're in a bit of a different financial situation where they're totally fine going through university and they have no previous work experience. and that might work for them. They might go on to be the best in whatever field they're at, but
Yeah.
they are the people that tend to put education as the number one thing on their CV, whereas the standard formula, and I'm pretty sure even if you ask the AI platforms these days of how to formulate a CV,
Mm-hmm.
they'd probably tell you that start with a brief about yourself,
Mm-hmm.
go on to your professional experience, and then finally talk about education. So that type of stuff, like, you'd think it's quite simple, or maybe doesn't make that big of a difference, but I've spoken to clients all the time that when we send over people's CVs, it's like, okay, I have to read through all of this just to get to what it is that you've been doing for the past couple of years on a professional sense. So for people that are coming out of uni, I kind of get it a bit more because they might not have any experience to begin with. But
Yeah.
especially for people that do have experience in their own field, I don't understand why that's a mistake that still gets made. I mean, what you've been doing for the past 2, 3, 4, 5, however many years, that should be the number one thing that you want to talk about. And so it should be at the top of your CV, not the bottom. Do you know what I
Mm.
mean?
I get what you mean. I think it's
Yeah.
a case of, especially with Russell groups, Ivy
Mm.
League, like there's a lot placed on prestigious
Maybe.
education.
Maybe.
Like, of course, like in my experience, and presumably with you, actual work experience tends to be more important.
Yeah.
But on that note, do you ever find a case where education actually is a needle mover? Like you have two candidates, maybe the your client's not sure, and then they see one went to X university and then one went to a lower ranked university. Does that ever come into play or no?
Very rarely, very, very rarely. And I won't say never because you're always going to get, certain employers, certain companies, whoever the hiring manager is for a particular role,
Mm-hmm.
they might know someone at that university or they might have
Mm.
gone to that university themselves. So, of course, they're going to have those innate biases. Um, but that being said, it's not something that we see commonly, or at least not for me.
Okay. Okay. Well, look, you said something interesting a moment ago about AI. Now, this is like a real big topic,
Yeah.
but I want to hear from you. Do you
Yeah.
think people should use AI on their CVs, or is it the opposite where it's like all the recruiters are saying, hey, when you use AI, we know it's terrible?
So it's a funny point actually because as you said, AI is getting incorporated into everything these days. We see it as probably the number one point of discussion in every discussion. That being said, you know, if we're being totally honest, AI is a very important tool
Yeah.
that it's hard to run from. So for me to say, do everything yourself, not only is that kind of idealistic, but also I don't think it's the smartest way to behave. I'd say the best way to move forward would probably have a mixture of using it and not using it. So there's the sense that, like you kind of mentioned, where we can tell that it's AI slop, as you want to call it.
Yeah.
Because sadly, or maybe not so sadly, AI is still at a level now where um, it's not perfect. If you read enough AI responses, you can pick up on certain words, certain phrasings where
Yeah.
you can easily tell that something's written by
The hyphens.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So you already know. So in that sense, the contents of a CV should be yours.
Mm.
However, I do believe that there's good ways to use AI when writing a decent CV. Like, for example, if you want to ask the AI to help you formulate it or structure it, just kind of like we were talking about a moment ago with
Mm.
where things should be placed, or, there's plenty of programs out there that can do that for you. And so I think that that's a pretty good way of using it. And also, one that's a little bit, it kind of links to a different point, which we can go on to, is also just, when it comes to what companies are looking for when you
Yeah.
apply directly, they might be using AI systems of their own. So what you can use AI for is look at a job description,
Mm-hmm.
give it to the program, and ask it to pick out on keywords that the job description is looking for you to include in your CV. So once it's identified that for you, if they are using any sort of AI systems themselves, it won't get struck out and it will go on to the next stage, hopefully.
Okay. Okay. So people need to get a little bit more creative with their AI
Yeah,
use.
it's not as simple as saying use AI or don't use AI. I
Yeah.
think that there's a good way of using it and also putting your own input into it. And so, just on that basis, I think that it definitely will have an increased presence
Yeah.
in how recruitment and CVs and interviews and everything goes. So just be smart about it, you know. Like I said, keep your own input in there, but also if there's good tools out there for you to use them.
Are there any tools in particular you would recommend to people?
I'm always a bit hesitant to say which one you should use and shouldn't
Yeah.
because I've had my own experiences with AI kind of leading me the wrong way. So I don't want to like throw anything specific out there unless it's like a very specific example. So I'd encourage people to do your own research, see what works for you. Try a few of the ones that are out there. It's not hard to find them, so just to be smart about it.
Okay, okay. I mean, listening to you speak, I tend to mostly agree.
Yeah.
My thoughts whenever I'm using AI for something like this and I get like a response back, it's always, well, if it's taking you 10, 20 seconds to think of this prompt and you're getting whatever this result is back, millions of people are likely formulating some sort of
Mm.
prompt which is really similar to yours. And so you're naturally going to have an AI sloppy type of
Right.
CV. So I do agree. I think it's better to use it more of as an editing tool, maybe as an idea start, as opposed to just make me a CV.
Right. I mean, in what capacity would you say you use AI? Because I don't imagine anyone in their job like leaves it 100% in the hands of the AI program, right?
I've heard people say they.
Really?
I've heard people say they do.
Well, yeah.
I don't. I've advised against it. I don't think it's wise. Yeah, for me, spell check. Yeah, I'm notoriously
Right, right,
bad for
right.
spell check. So AI has been a lifesaver for that. But in terms of actually generating, day to day tasks, prompts of
Gotcha.
what you do, it's a bit difficult just because it's so niche, so specific,
Yeah.
like what someone's day to day roles might be. So it's not really a particular use case for me. One thing I am interested about though
Mm.
is cover letters because I know a lot of people use AI for cover letters.
Yeah.
Is that another one where you can tell it instantly?
Well, see, the thing is, cover letters actually, I don't know, like it depends maybe which field we're talking about here, because actually a lot of the things that I focus on these days,
Yeah,
cover letters are being phased out a lot more because, especially when it comes to some of the more commercial roles, there's so much like impetus on, the character of the person, their
mm,
temperament, their charisma, and those things that can't really be quantified within like words on a page.
yeah,
That it's actually okay. Let's get on to the next stage as soon as possible. So a CV would be like an intro point, and
okay,
then it's kind of like let's not waste any more time. Either like, do we like them or do we not? Let's meet them. That type of thing. So cover letters. Um, if we're talking very broadly, I'd say probably a bit more room to speed things up for you um, with AI.
yeah,
However, again, it just leaves more room for AI to make mistakes. So I'd be very careful with that. Um, you'd be
mm,
surprised by how many times I've actually spoken to clients and they said, like, oh, we've received like 3 or 4 CVs or cover letters and they're basically identical.
yeah,
So it's something that they pick up on. And to be honest, like sometimes it's not necessarily like a thing of like, okay, the candidate's out just purely based on that basis. But I mean, it's not something that you want to start off the conversation with. It's
doesn't
not
look
putting your
good.
best foot
Yeah.
forward. Let's just say that.
So in situations like that, it might be better to just omit a cover letter completely than send a generic one.
Well, it depends. If they require a cover letter, then I'd try to put something, even if it's like a paragraph of my own words. But
Assuming it's optional, 'cause a lot of them
yeah,
have optional
yeah.
cover
If it's
letters.
optional, then yeah. I mean, look, a strong CV is definitely more important than like having like a really good cover letter and a really good CV.
Okay. Well, on the topic of charisma, the
Mm,
best candidates appealing to employees,
sure.
what would you say are some of the characteristics, personality traits of the best candidates that you've hired?
That's a really good question. Um, to be honest,
Hmm.
transparency is very important about everything. So
Okay.
transparency, just being open with us as the recruiter. We're here to help. Obviously, like we have our own agendas,
Yeah.
of course. I'm not gonna ever shy away from that or hide from that. This is a job for us ultimately, but I like to hope, at least for myself, changed a lot of people's lives for the better. So since we're trying to help you, if you're as transparent with us as possible, it really does help. If there's anything specific, when it comes to the money side of things, when it comes to maybe any specific agreements that you have with your company, telling us like what package you made last year, or the things that you focus on when it comes to clients, the clients that you could bring over, maybe some clients that are tied into your own company right now that you can't bring over. All of that stuff is really kind of painting us the picture
Yeah.
of how we need to handle the situation. And we're only 1% of the process, but we're what I like to think a pretty important 1% to help it run a bit more smoothly. So um, being open and transparent, honest with us, that really goes a long way. That's a really important quality, which actually kind of links into another one, which is the lack of ego. Um,
Okay.
I'd I'd say that's pretty essential as well, because not only does that allow us to work with you easier,
Mhm.
but also when you're in the actual interview with the employer, with the company,
Yeah.
um, you're just going to come off a little bit better as well, because even if you're excellent at your job, which that also helps,
Mhm.
of course, needless to say, if your ego is pretty low when you walk into these type of conversations, then hopefully that kind of you know just allows the conversations to go by a bit smoother. um, Everyone walks away with a bit more of a positive impression, as opposed to, oh, this guy's a bit pompous
Yeah.
or whatever. He thinks he knows everything already and he's better than us. So yeah, I'm just trying to think of some of the best candidates, and that's kind of the main things that come to mind. Of course, there's others, like being proactive to interviews, giving us your time and availability in advance. That really helps.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so just a couple things like that, they really go a long way.
On the piece about honesty, is it common to you would say that candidates aren't being honest or candidates are lying? And if so, what type of problems can that cause?
Yeah, so it is actually pretty common, sadly.
Mm.
But I say that there's also a lot of recruiters that don't behave in the most ethical ways.
Oh, for
So
sure.
yeah, it's not like it's a one-way street, sadly. Yeah, no, it does happen a lot, and some of the problems that can come up from that is
Yeah.
a candidate may say that he can do X, Y, and Z for a company.
Mm-hmm.
Then the client says, okay. They do their own background research because they might know someone from like a adjacent company, parent company, or
Yeah.
even someone who's a colleague of theirs. And then they'll turn around and say, hey, that's actually not the case. This person's never worked with this account, or maybe they just like completely fabricated it, or maybe, they used to work with them, now they don't anymore for whatever reason that is. And so if you're saying things that aren't true, they are going to come to light eventually at some point. Even like, let's say if you join the company, they pay
Mm-hmm.
you whatever it is that you want, you come on board with company X, and then you have a pretty slow first 3 months, 6 months. There's no hiding from like whatever you've said for too long.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Okay. Okay. Look, that makes perfect sense. I mean, one interesting thing you said there was about the background checks. On background checks, this is something I've heard mixed things about from
Hmm.
different recruiters. Like I've heard some recruiters say, never lie, always going to get background checks. And then I've also heard some recruiters say background checks essentially never happen. They're just sitting in HR's email box.
Right. Um, it's always case by case, to be honest, and it depends. Sometimes the hiring manager or director, or whoever is in charge of the process, will actually check themselves because, like I mentioned, they might just know someone at the company anyway.
Mm.
So yeah, I can't say definitely for sure like it won't happen. I assume that it will, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's why better be safe than sorry. That's just my mentality about it. So I say don't lie if you can, definitely. Unless it's like something that eh, you think that is worth mentioning, that maybe you used to do, you don't anymore. I mean, maybe you can try and spin it a certain way, but I always encourage people to stay away from that.
Do you find it's like particular demographics who tend to lie more? Because maybe I'm biased, but when I hear this, I always think, oh, this is just the Gen Z, or this is younger
Right.
people trying to break into the industry doing this, or is this just something where people across the board they just want to get ahead and they're just lying?
Again, I don't want to generalize. I'd say that you actually get people maybe telling some half truths everywhere. You know, some of the more experienced people in the industry, they might paint things a little bit differently than others, just purely on the fact that they really want a certain job or position.
Yeah.
They might say, "Oh, I can work with X, Y, and Z," or "I know this person at that company or
Mm.
at that company." Doesn't necessarily mean you have a business relationship with them. So those are
Mm.
two different things.
Okay.
Just because I know someone who works for, I don't know, any of the big companies, Amazon or whatever,
Yeah.
doesn't mean I'm going to be working with Amazon, you know? Even if that's my best friend, I went uni with him, I've known him for 10 years, doesn't mean anything. So there's like these half truths
Yeah.
that can come up. But when it comes to specific demographics, I guess you could say maybe some of the younger ones, you know, because they're so desperate to make a breakthrough into a role or a company, which I understand, I empathize with a lot. You know, by any means necessary kind of mentality, but yeah, I don't think it's the smartest thing to do. You let your personality do most of the talking. You know, if you're ambitious and, you know, just if you can get yourself in front of the person to actually try and convince them, and there's different ways of doing that. But I wouldn't say necessarily one group more than the other. Everyone does it. I wish they didn't. So, yeah.
Okay. When you say there's different ways of getting in front of people, what are some of those methods of getting in front of hiring bodies?
Well, okay. This is might sound a bit oversimplified, but
Mm-hmm.
Google's such a powerful tool. Like even when I was alluding to LinkedIn earlier, like one of the main things that comes to mind is how people underutilize it. You know, in the sense that anyone from any company, almost
Yeah.
a small asterisk there, almost anyone from any company is available to you through InMail or connection. So if you're using LinkedIn
Could you
to
just explain what email is, please?
yeah, so InMail is basically it's something where you can reach out to someone on LinkedIn via message,
Mm-hmm.
where you don't necessarily have to connect with them. It's just like a direct message, and they can refuse it, but they first have to like read it, kind of
Okay.
thing. So after that, you can't message them again. But if they accept it, you know, it's a form of speaking with them without necessarily having to connect, which some people actually find useful when discussing with recruiters because they might not want to see that they're connected with a recruiter on LinkedIn. So through InMail, it's actually a little bit better to kind of like keep it low key and as covert as possible. So basically, you know, if you reach out to them on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
there's a pretty decent chance, you know, if you use an InMail, use a connection, you can get through to them. Or even if you don't, if even if they just connect back but they're not replying, they might have their email on there, they might have their phone number on there or something like that. So there's different ways to try and reach out to someone. Now, I'm not saying like spam them with all these messages on every single platform, but I'm
Yeah.
just saying it gives you a little bit better of a chance to, you know, get your foot through the door as opposed to just, you know, sending in a CV to this um, you know, unfathomable system that exists, whether it be AI or not. You know, you're not just like throwing your CV into the void. There's actually certain things you can try to do to get their attention. I hope
Mm.
that makes sense.
No, it does. And I guess in your experience, then this is something that's definitely underutilized with people.
For sure.
So do you think in general people just, despite maybe wanting the job a lot, they're maybe not putting their best foot forward, maybe not using all the tools available to them, they're not being conniving enough?
It's a bit harsh to say that for everyone, but I'd say people could be doing more.
Okay.
For sure, for sure. And it might not be by any fault of their own. It might just be, you know, poor education about some of this stuff. So um, I think there's more that could be done from their side also.
Okay. Okay. Well, on CVs and great candidates, let's talk about interviewing a little bit.
Sure.
Now, obviously, you're not in the interview room with the client, but what would you say from feedback, perhaps, are the biggest mistakes people are making in the interview process?
To be honest with you, interviews is probably one of the like most complex thing for us because you never know how it's gonna go. You can do all that you can in trying to prepare someone for an interview, but like you said, we're not there in there with them, like holding their hand through it. So that human factor is hard to measure at times. And honestly, me and you could talk about interviews for another like 2 3 hours just on that. But there's so many things that people might misconstrue or get wrong. Even just from like simply researching who it is you're interviewing with. And this is where LinkedIn comes in again, or Google just in general. You know, if you know the company like that you're interviewing with, some people would just be like fine with researching the company, click on the company page, read a bit about their about page,
Yeah.
and that's it, which is a good starting point. But even if and a good recruiter should tell you who it is that you'll be speaking with. If you know the name of the person that you're going to be communicating with, why not search on Google like about their articles or whatever that may be out there. On LinkedIn, you can search a name, and hopefully, if they're on there, you can tell a bit about their background. That already gives you a little bit more insight into what it is that they specialize in. Maybe they came from a slightly different industry. So if they are now in like maybe an operations role, like head of logistics, operations or whatever,
Yeah.
but they came from a more commercial background, maybe they might be someone that appreciates if you put forward stats and figures first, so there's different things that you can do just from a simple research perspective that really go under the radar for a lot of people. There's other things also, like there's certain questions that interviewers love to sneak in as almost like trick questions to see if the candidate falls for the trap.
Mm-hmm.
Just one example, maybe something they might phrase it like, "What's your 5-year plan or 6-year plan?" Or
what's the wrong way to answer that?
Well, the wrong way to answer that would be something along the lines of, "Oh, I'm just kind of like interested in the role, want to see how it goes. I'm interested to know a bit more about how the company does this, and I'm just sort of testing the waters." That's the worst way to go about it, frankly speaking, because no employer wants to invest in someone who isn't committed to the role and is just sort of, as they put it, testing the waters. So the right way, or the way that I would advise people go about it, is show them that you're committed. It's not something that you just want to like dip your toe into and see if it works. Think of it as something that, I'm going to be here for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do my best to basically solve your problem. Obviously, that's going to be the main sort of thing that you're trying to figure out within the interview. Am I the right person to solve your problem? And for them also that, they're trying to figure out both ways. So, all that being said, don't sound uncommitted. Try and make it seem like this is the best hire they're going to make because it's one that's going to be for the foreseeable future. You don't have to make it sound like you want to retire there necessarily, but just show that it's not something that you're just kind of exploring, or like those sort of buzzwords,
I'm surprised to hear that. I don't think people were being nonchalant in interviews. I always thought people were really selling how excited they were.
You'd be surprised. Well, it also comes from which sort of like position someone's coming from, right? If they're not desperate, if they're maybe someone that's, already like really happy at their job. And actually, a large part of what we do as recruiters is try and go after the people that are happy with what they're doing right now.
Home workers.
Well, in a way, because we can try to improve someone's position through different means. But there's those people are the ones that will be a bit more nonchalant, like you said. The ones that maybe are a bit more determined to prove their ambition are the ones that maybe don't have something secure right now, or will be likely to lose their job very soon. So yeah, those type of things. There's another question that tends to come up, which is like, how should I phrase this? They might ask something like, how come we're having this conversation? Is there anything wrong at your current job which is making you want to explore something new? And that's a pitfall trap, essentially. They're kind of asking you to slate your company, kind of thing, slate your employer, which never looks well on the person. But we do get some people doing that, sadly. So
I hate my manager.
Yeah, well, they'll start going into the most personal details for no reason. I always tell people, like, even if there is something like that you're not happy about, always try and make it seem as like you're grateful for the opportunity. Always try to say that, things aren't that bad, at least, things are going fairly well. You don't have to paint it as paradise, but at the same time, just try to not slate your boss. It never looks good on you, because then they're thinking like, oh, if we hire this person and then they leave one day, they're looking for another job, they might start slating us and ruin our reputation in the market. So there's a couple things that, you know, again, I think are pretty simple, but maybe people might get caught up in the like, you know, energy of the interview and whatever, they might not think of it. So there's a couple questions like that. And then also another one that comes up a lot is also the money topic, which can get a little bit awkward for people.
Okay.
But
Do people talk about money in interviews? I always thought that was more of like a follow up thing.
it depends. Again, case by case. Depends how the company does it. Some people they just want to like skip all the, you know, waffle and just get to the point.
Yeah.
So you never know. I'd say in most cases you're actually right on that. It is left for a follow up, and sometimes even the agency might take care of that. But in the off chance that it comes up in an interview, you know, people really easily fall to kind of giving like their number, and
Mm,
I'd say that's not the right way to go about it personally. Because it, even if you're having a great interview, let's
yeah.
say that, you know, you have your specific number in mind or whatever. And even if the interview is going great, if you come in with a number that's too high than what they're thinking, the employer's already thinking like, oh, you know, we really like this person, but it's already a little bit more than like we were thinking. And especially when they haven't invested so much time into it and it is like a first initial interview, it's much easier for them to say, you know what, no thank you. Alternatively, there might also be a case where, you know, someone comes with their number and it's lower than what the employer was thinking, so actually if they play their cards a little bit differently, they could have got more money.
Mm.
So that is a little bit of like a like, it's one of those topics where you really need to know how to speak about it in order to handle it a little bit better.
Okay.
Because there are different ways to go about it that would actually prove you in a better position than that. So I'd avoid going with like, this is my number, like yes or no kind of thing, or, you know, just try to be open with it.
Yo, that's interesting because I feel like so much of the conventional advice nowadays is, yeah, go in, say 20, 30K higher than what you actually want and then negotiate down. But you're saying if you go in like that, you potentially risk losing the job.
Look, I'm obviously not going to tell anyone exactly how to behave.
Tell them, man, you're the expert.
I'll leave it up to you guys to kind of decide how you want to proceed. But my advice would be,
Yeah.
you know, be open and flexible about it. If someone was to ask, you know, how much would it take to get you on board,
Hmm.
give them an idea of your package right now, whatever it is that you're working on, your gross package, and at least then they kind of have an idea. Okay, this is what someone's on. Um, Going on from that, you know, say I'm flexible to hear what you guys have to offer, kind of thing.
Put the ball back in their court.
Exactly. And so at least then they know what you're on, and hopefully no employer is stupid enough to offer you less if they really like you. Hopefully. If they do, then that's fine. You can walk away.
Yeah.
No harm there. But hopefully they at least offer you the same, if not more. So you're kind of putting the ball in their court. You're not making it awkward. And if they really press you for a number, look, there's no harm in saying, you know, today I'm more so focused on meeting you and learning about the opportunity, but please give me a bit more time to, you know, figure out what my number is. But
Okay.
at least now they know what you're on, kind of thing.
So, Jacob, we've got the perfect CV now. We've ironed out the interview mistakes.
Sure.
We've reduced the usage of AI and we've negotiated a fantastic salary. But I want to ask you about the wider context of hiring. Let's say we've done
Sure.
all that. How are companies hiring today versus 3, 5, 6, 7 years ago? Even for the people doing everything right.
You know, it's actually not the best time we find ourselves in, to be honest. Like, if we're talking 3, 5 years ago, um,
Mhm.
I mean, let's start off from the point that is COVID, which was a total anomaly. It's very hard to weigh up things during that time, just because, you know, it's unprecedented. Um, so if we look after COVID, around 2022, I believe in that year the peak number of vacancies was somewhere around what, like peak vacancies for jobs in the UK at one particular point was somewhere around 1.2 million.
Mm.
Whereas now I think just gone by March this year, 2026, the peak so far that we've seen this year was only 700K. So clear disparity there.
Yeah.
At the time, people are opening their doors again to normal life, if you want to call it that. And so they're trying to employ. But now we find ourselves in a situation where we have growth uncertainty for a lot of companies,
Yeah.
economic uncertainty just globally. Um, it's getting more expensive to hire employees. I think just in April we had the over 21 minimum wage revised, and that's gone up. So there's a lot of things that have contributed these days to making it more harder for companies to hire.
Yeah.
And so it is harder to find jobs, sadly. I always like to look at the financial institutions because, especially as someone that's living in London, what's our biggest export? Financial services, banking, that type of stuff. So you look at the big four, you look at the KPMGs of the world and what they're kind of like predicting. And they're saying that in 2026, we'll see a 50% increase in financial firms hiring compared to 2025. But I'm not sure if that's true. I mean, we're yet to see that happen, and
Yeah.
we'll see if that's the case. Only time will tell. The only thing that I will caveat on, and this is part of the larger AI conversation. A lot of these like financial service companies, you know, um, I think it was reported there was a 12% increase in hires across financial service companies specifically from middle of 2025 up until now
Yeah.
in 2026. But guess in what sort of roles that increase is in? It's all AI. It's
Yeah.
all technology. It's all like things that in a year's, maybe not a year's time, but down the line, it's all going to be things that basically make it harder for people to get employed. We're helping these companies
Remove
develop.
jobs.
Yeah, basically take the jobs away. We're developing their AI. So a lot of things like that, it's very damning to kind of look at it in a microcosm because things aren't good now. If they do improve, I feel like it's kind of false hope. And so I don't mean to like bring everyone kind of like down, but
Gotta be honest, man.
I think we have to be a bit realistic about it and look at where things are at. So yeah, it's looking bleak, sadly, right now.
So, on that note, say you're a Gen Z person, you haven't broken into the industry yet, but you have whatever industry you're interested in, whether it be advertising, banking, law, whatever.
Hmm.
Are there any sort of ideas and tips, maybe outside of messaging recruiters directly, or just career strategies to help them get that first start before it becomes, literally impossible?
Well, I'd actually encourage people if you're just starting out, I'd say actually sometimes you're better off not going for a recruiter.
Okay.
The reason for that being, to be honest, and this is even more so the case when you're switching industries.
Yeah.
As recruiters, we obviously charge a fee to our clients, the companies that we work with. And so what they're basically hiring us for is to be like the specialist headhunters, take from their direct competitors
Yeah.
and so forth. Because really and truly, they could all start up, like the big companies anyway, they could all start up their own like graduate programs and take people right from uni. So in their mind, what are they paying us for? They're paying for us to find them the best of the best. And no offense to anyone who's just starting out there, but sadly, you're not it. So sometimes you have a better chance of actually going through the process by yourself, or some of the other means that we mentioned of trying to contact hiring managers, because if we put you forward, you'll get turned down right off the basis of lack of experience. That's happened time and time again. And employers can even change their mind. At one point, they might be like, yeah, oh, we're open to hiring juniors. And then you send out a bunch of junior profiles with one senior one. Guess what? They're only interested in the senior one. So,
Do you think AI in particular is just going to wipe out junior roles across a lot of different sectors?
I don't think so. I think there'll always be the sort of like impetus on the human element, and especially for some of the more commercial roles where like, if you're hiring a broker or you're hiring someone that works face to face with clients all the time, I doubt that AI is going to replace that, because you're always going to need someone with that human element to strike up relationships, make deals happen.
Yeah.
And AI just simply doesn't have that. So you need juniors to be able to be trained up into these experienced professionals. That's why I don't think AI will ever totally overtake like all different roles. But it definitely will have more of a presence in
Okay.
every market, in my opinion.
Okay. Okay. On career management now, not just for Gen Z, but I think particularly for Gen Z, but broadly as well.
Yep.
What do you think about people who job hop?
So I always advise against it. And again, we talk to clients all the time. I can tell you for a fact that there's so many employers out there that when they see, 1 year here, 1 year there, it never looks good.
Mm,
And even though there's like a lot of like really substantial cases where, they have a legitimate reason for taking time off or skipping to a different company,
yeah.
it never looks good. Um, I'd say if you have 3 jobs back to back, where you've only done a year or less, then you really should try and change that. I always advise to people at least to stick it out for 2 years,
Yeah.
if more than great. Um, but it's a tricky one. Look, if someone's absolutely miserable and they hate it, I'm never gonna say no, don't do it. But I'm just being open and honest, in that employers do look at that. Again, it kind of goes back to the longevity question. They don't
Yeah.
want to hire someone for the short term or someone that just has a history of trying their hand here and there. They want someone that, okay, if we invest in, they're going to be someone of us for the long term. They're going to make us a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, don't job hop, guys.
I think, I think for a lot of people, it's the financial aspect because,
Sure.
it's a lot quicker to go from senior exec account manager or junior manager to director job hopping than it is to stay at one company and progress naturally that way. I think people are drawn more towards that, the quick cash. And on some level, I get it because London's a very expensive city to live in.
Mm.
It's only getting more expensive, and people want to be successful as fast as possible. But with that, you would still say it's more important sometimes to just stick it out, delay the gratification slightly to make sure that those bigger opportunities are still there for you.
For sure. Like, and grass isn't always green on the other side.
Very true.
So
Very, very true.
sometimes it might seem like it's the right thing to do for maybe just a small increase in money or responsibility, but the intangibles are like who you work with and the team around you,
So important.
your exactly your boss, the environment, how stressful it is, that type of stuff. So um and again, if it's a little bit more money, is it worth it for you to not stay at this job that you have secured and you kind of like enough
Yeah.
to be there in the first place, and then do another year and then maybe revisit these options? If you're good at your job, the opportunity will always be there, but just maybe with a different company. Um, it's not like every door. It's not like every door will shut on you totally. So I don't think it's worth it, but everyone's got their own circumstances, so they should view that through their lens, I suppose. I just know how employers react to it, and it's never positively, to be honest. But again,
Yeah.
that also is a little bit specific to the type of role that they're doing, because especially in scenarios where you do a commercial role and you're working with clients and different companies, it's like, how can you really establish good connections and grow your client base, grow your portfolio that you can bring over to other companies if you keep shifting companies,
Yeah.
and you're left on like 3-month gardening leave or even 6 months in certain cases where you can't work, legally speaking. So how can you remain active in the market, keep your name out there, or keep talking to the people you're talking to? That's one instance. And also even from like the exec roles, when we recruit for CEOs, CCOs, CFOs, those level like roles. I I I mean, you're trusted with building a company in those instances, right? Building something and establishing an ethos, incorporating different systems into a company. How can you do that, or how can you be relied upon to do that if you're switching companies every year? So there's different instances where I think it's even more damning. Maybe for the operations level roles, it's a bit less harmful, but I'd usually tell people to at least do 2 years at their respective company, at least 2 years.
On those C-suite roles, Do you find there's a difference in the hiring process and like the types of personalities when you're dealing with C-suite characters versus maybe like a smaller salary role or a lower position role, or is it functionally the same process?
It's functionally the same, I'd say, in terms of the process itself, and even like the profiles that we're dealing with in terms of personality. They're it's still people at the end of the day.
Okay.
So you're gonna get some friendly ones, some less friendly ones, um, but maybe sometimes there's a bit more checks that have to be done before someone is fully employed, and obviously like they might be tied into a contract that will keep them out of the market for even longer.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that needs to be dealt with. But at the end of the day, it's still the same process.
Okay. Okay. Well, look, Jacob, there are probably some people listening right now, listen to your experience, some of the things you do, your advice, and they're probably a little bit interested in recruitment.
Okay.
What would you say to the person right now who's sitting there thinking, should I go into recruitment? Should that be where I take my career next?
Hmm. Um, well, I would say that be prepared to sacrifice a lot of your time.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a job that will require you to do absurd hours at times where you don't want to do them. The example that always comes into my head is when I was having at the time my anniversary, and I had to take a call during the dinner because there was like a mass exodus at this Norwegian company that and that was like a whole big saga that lasted 2 or 3 months, but it was a very important call to do at the time. And despite me having my own commitments, it's something that you can't really say no to because you know it's not something that happens every single day.
Yeah.
You have to strike whilst the iron's hot. So be prepared to sacrifice important time that you'd prefer to spend with loved ones or friends.
Mm-hmm.
But if you follow the process, if you don't cut corners and stay committed, stay resilient, then you can make a lot of money out of it for sure. And meet a lot of very interesting people as well. That's one thing that really stands out to me from the job, like
Yeah.
being able to speak to people globally from so many different walks of life and being able to build relations to the point where I could speak to someone now and they're asking me like, hey, when are you gonna come down to Geneva or Brazil or Dubai, Singapore, like these places. Like you've built really good connections with people, changed lives. Like those are things that not every job can offer you, and getting paid well as well. That definitely doesn't hurt. So
Well, it sounds fulfilling, but I would say, I guess another question for me on that, speaking to you as a senior recruiter, when it comes to that commitment piece, do you find people who come into recruitment underestimate that particular element?
oh, for sure. I mean, at the start, I underestimated it as well.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that you don't really know until you're like in the thick of it, and just like you get your quieter times and
Yeah.
the much more chaotic times, but when the ball starts going and there's so many things that you need to juggle all at once, you really start to feel the brunt of it. So yeah, I'd say it's quite common to underestimate that.
Okay. Okay. And then on the role itself, when you're dealing with these massive deals, right? Because obviously you're getting some percentage of the salary.
Sure.
When you're going about closing 5, 6, 7 figure deals, how do you go about doing that? And is there a big difference in your process depending on the size of the deal?
The process is always the same. Sometimes there's just a couple extra steps because of like the position that you might be dealing with, um, or however many people are involved in the deal itself.
Yeah.
But the process is always the same. Try not to cut corners. Um,
What does cutting corners look like in recruitment?
so, one of the things that we talked about, candidate ownership,
Yeah.
not getting their CV, for example. That speeds things up an awful lot because you're not waiting for someone who maybe has made a CV in 10 years to make one.
That seems like a big omission.
A big omission indeed. So that's one way of doing it. And look, sometimes someone just will outright refuse to make a CV. And in those instances,
Really?
yeah, it's happened. Some people are just, again, this is where the ego element of a good candidate comes in. People think, oh, this person knows me. I'm a big name in the industry. I don't need to make a CV. Who do you think I am?
Okay.
That type of situation. So in that case, you just need to say thank you for your time and move on to the next, because if you cut corners, it's going to ultimately burn you in the end. So I'd say the process is usually the same, not too different. Just like you need to remain resilient throughout it, remain patient, and be willing to do whatever it takes. You know, you might be dealing with someone who's the perfect candidate, but they're going through the worst time in their life at the moment. So you might have to be their personal therapist. You might have to be up at 5 a.m. to speak to them wherever they're based in the world. They might be traveling, so they might tell you, hey, I'm going to call you at this time, and then they call you 3 hours later. You have to pick up. So,
wow, man, recruitment, better health.
Yeah, pretty much. We do it all.
Okay. Well, look, Jacob, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. I hope that the people listening and watching took a tremendous amount of information away today. I'm sure they did. But thank you again for being here, man.
No worries. Or anytime.
My guy.